Welcome to the dining table. This is another opportunity to have a chat with someone around the dining table, a bit longer than the kitchen table when we have a conversation around the dining table. And today with me I have Philippa Lowe. Welcome, Philippa.
Well, it's good to be here.
And Philippa, I've known for a while. She's got a background in PR, more than a background in that, and works in a boys' school at the moment, but has a whole range of experiences that I thought would be worth chatting about, and about her life around who Jesus is in her life, what work means in the world for her, and how she sees things being a Christian in this world. So welcome, it's great to have you. And the first thing I thought I would ask you, because a few people know it, is that you have a crazy Christian story. You weren't always a Christian when you were young, were you?
No, I certainly wasn't expecting to meet Jesus in my early 40s. It was rather inconvenient, in my humble opinion. So he kind of jumped into my life in a large way and kind of turned everything upside down. And I'd been umming and ahhing about a few things, and my kids were small, and a local school had advertised for a PR communications role, and they were a Christian school, and they said something in the job description about, practicing Christian active in their church, and I kind of rolled my eyes a little bit and went, I'm in PR, I can
spin anything.
That. Yeah, exactly. How hard can it be? And I, got to the interview and had a lovely interview, and then the next day the lead panel person called and said, look, it was a great interview, however when we asked you about your faith, you kind of danced around it. And at the time, not knowing what I know now, I look back and laugh, because it's like you actually can't blag thinking that you know about Jesus. You just can't.
Only so much PR you can do. Yeah.
So I kind of took it on the chin, but I didn't know. My ego was frankly just mortified. And we were going away, and it was Easter weekend, and my husband and I and some friends, we were going up to Great Mackerel Beach, and we got the ferry over, and as we got off the ferry, there was a communal boat shed of books for the holiday reading. And out of all these books, the only book that fell at my feet was the Bible.
No.
Well, and I kind of looked at it and stopped over it. It was like, Christians wouldn't give me a job. Found the holiday house. Lovely evening, went to bed, 3 o'clock, woke up by these lyrics in my brain that I hadn't heard in decades, re-blasting in my head. And I thought, it's weird, and I couldn't get back to sleep. So I got up, went for a walk, the sun was coming up, and as I was walking on the beach, this sailboat's going across and sails go up. Mr. Christian emblazoned on the sails, and once again I was like, flipping Christians wouldn't give me a job. Next day, same time in the morning, same song lyrics blasting through my head. And that happened again Easter Sunday morning, same time. Easter Monday morning, same time, same lyrics. So I literally sat up in bed and went, what are you trying to tell me?
Easter weekend, you're really risking it.
And I got a really kind of agnostic kind of crystals, runes, new age yogic thing going on. And this voice that was of me but not mine said, sort it out. You have all this unconditional love for, all these religions you've been investigating. What about the Christian faith? And I kind of got a little bit of a knowledge in that I'd gone when I was quite small to a Church of England school, and I can remember doing scripture lessons. And I kind of was like, oh, really? And then my husband woke up, and I sort of shared it with him, and he said, well, Phil, Peter did, Jesus did have to ask Peter 3 times. And I'm like, well, you're not helping. Came back to Sydney, decided I was going to ignore it, and tried to ignore it, and there was just this pressing on me. Just like, who is Jesus? Who is this? So in the end, I just Googled, learned more about Jesus, and put it near my suburb. And this church popped up, so I just picked up the phone. And the person on the other end of the phone probably blew every stereotype I had out of the water about pastors. And we had this hilarious conversation where I pretty much explained what had happened. And then he said to me, he said, okay, you married? I said, yeah. He said, got kids? I said, yeah. He said, what are their names? I said, Sebastian and Grace. He said, you've got a daughter called Grace. Huh. And I said, look, I think
he's laying it on thick by now.
And I was like, well, and there was a course, like a Christianity Explored course. I was like, I don't need to come. I've missed 6 of the 8 weeks. Just send me the link. I'll do some reading. And he said, oh, okay, I'll send you some material, but, email me back. He said, but I know how this ends.
Wow.
And I still remember this sort of, I call it now, the Holy Spirit emotional vomit in me that just goes, and I was like, wow, that was a really significant thing that you just said, and I'm just going to try and ignore it. And I kind of went, oh, you want to tell me now and save me some time? And he just laughed and he said, no, I reckon it'll be really good fun watching.
Wow, that's a really brave and courageous and trusting thing to say to you, rather than sign the deal now.
Yes, or, quick, come along and, 7 ways to live, and quick, fill out this form.
Yeah.
And I asked him later, because he then observed, I kind of started researching, went to church a few times, and I always say that Jesus, I accepted Jesus in my heart first, but my head wanted to catch up, because my background is journalism.
Yeah.
And for me, the facts have to stack up.
Mm.
So, I have a whole preponderance of atheist friends, so I thought, well, I feel this change happening within me, but if I start telling people, they're going to go, oh yeah, you're in a cult or whatever. So I was really doing lots of research. So I think I wasn't converted by the Bible, I was converted by Tim Keller's The Reason for God in the Age of Skepticism.
Wow. That's an interesting... Just the way you described that the first experience you had is out there, isn't it? It's not something you could actually explain.
No.
But you still need to join heart and head at some level, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And Tim Keller would be a great landing point for that.
Yeah. And I'd also heard at the church, I'd gone to an evening event, and a young Muslim couple had shared how they'd fled their homeland and converted to Christianity. And he used the line that his head accepted Jesus before his heart. And as I sat there listening to him, I thought, no, that's not me. That's the other way around. And then other little things that had happened, like I'd pop along to church. And I think this is really interesting about how churches do welcoming, because, it's almost like you don't want to freak the visitor out, but then they all start running around going, oh, we've got a visitor, what do we do?
Shine the spotlight on them.
And they were really, really very natural. And this one welcomer who would just say each week, impressed me because he remembered my name, but then would just go, hey, how's it all going, Phil? Yeah, how's your journey with God? And I'd kind of play these dismissive sort of, this is your dance space, this is mine. I'm not willing to, feeling quite vulnerable about this, and I don't need you to be poking in too much. But I said something like, God and I are in dialogue. I kept it very high level, because you can keep God at a distance. And he looked at me and he said, but Jesus is the lightning rod. He's the one that you've got to get to grips with. So it was all these people were just really putting Jesus quite firmly in front of me.
Yeah.
And I think that does become part of that Christian conversation is, it's really confronting, particularly in a secular world that kind of says your truth is your truth, and that's not my truth, but that's okay, you can have your truth. And when you're actually having a conversation that says, well, actually, no, Jesus said the only way to God's through me. Yeah. So you've actually got to deal with me. And
that's the thing, isn't it? That you can be vague and non-emotional about the God thing, but the Jesus thing, he kind of looks you in the eye, doesn't he? And that's the thing. What difference did that make? You see, plenty of people become Christian or can never remember a point where they weren't. But here you are working in a field that is not traditionally known for lots of gushy Christians, and suddenly I'm going to follow Jesus, but I can see that could be a 90-degree angle to everything else I do in life. What were you doing at the time, and how did you put those two worlds together?
Well, I had my PR agency at the time. I had my kids. I mean, interestingly, hilariously, I did have my kids at a Christian school because it was all about the ethic worldview.
Of course.
I just didn't want to inconvenient Jesus conversation with them. And I think I was just quite quietly figuring it out. I wasn't saying much. And then I just decided I would start blogging about the experience because, again, it's like it was this very important heart change that was going on. And it was kind of like, I don't actually want to just like be that vulnerable to everyone. But I'm a very good writer, so I could actually write it all out. And I can remember just thinking, I'll just write quietly and no one will read it. But then at least I can just point my friends to it.
But I bet they read it.
Yeah. Well, there was like 10,000 readers in a couple of months. So God was just doing other stuff. Because I was like, no, this has nothing to do with me. And it's almost like God was going, no, yes it is. And I'm actually using this. Yeah. And I think that's what you have to learn as a new Christian is that, God invites you into his plans and purposes. And a lot of the time you sit there going, who, me? Really? Yeah. Matt? And then like Moses was the same. Who, me? No. Yes, you, Moses. And since when it is about you, it's actually about me.
That's right. And and God taking the things you already do and redeeming them, but also your work itself it probably, a lot of it won't change. You still got to do the same things, but it puts a different tone on it, I think, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I wonder about people who try and work out, okay, I have faith and I have work, and I think it's very easy to try and keep them both separate. And the same pastor who said to me, I think it'll be really good fun watching how this all goes. I remember saying something about my agency, because I couldn't find a way to reconcile them, and I said something like, well, I don't understand why God would be interested in my work, because it didn't seem particularly Christian.
You're holy and
yeah, I'm not on a mission.
Yeah.
And he actually said, well, a better question would be asked, why would you think he would not be interested in your work?
That's very good.
And I went, oh.
He asked some good questions.
He did ask some very good questions. So that was a kind of interesting one, and in the end, because I kind of ended up feeling quite moved to try and work more and basically get to know God and Jesus better. And again, it was one of those, I prayed a crazy prayer and went, okay, you hunted me down in my early 40s, I love leading a team, I love this agency, but is there anything else that you want me to do? And someone messaged me with an operations manager role for an international mission. And part of that prayer, I'd always said, if you really want me to do something, put it up in lights and use the voice from Manuel from Faulty Towers. Otherwise, I might miss Lord Dean speaking to me.
Well, obviously, if it's sailboat with Mr. Christian on it, it's like...
up in lights. Yeah. And as I read the job description and went, oh my goodness, that's me. And again, flipped it to the same pastor who went, I think someone's just written the job description for you. And as it came, and I went, don't even ask me what I prayed yesterday. And he said, I have to. What did you pray? And I said, well, basically, what do you want me to do? And as all that came in, all the lights in my office flickered. This whole up in lights thing, and I went, okay. So I just stepped in, and I always talk about faith now as like I let go of the trapeze and I trust Jesus and God and the Holy Spirit will bring the next one.
That's amazing. That's a great image as well, because I think growing up Christian, it's kind of different because you feel like I know the ropes and pulleys at this stage, and I can sort of pull them in different ways, and you can kind of get into doing that. But when you're just out there and going, this is free solo, I'm climbing Yosemite, and it's like, I've got to trust.
Yeah, and I probably did a lot of freestyle. I did a lot of Reverend Google for a lot of time. Because I'm a journalist by background, so I was going to question stuff. So just sitting there on a Sunday listening to a sermon, it was funny because then my son is, very questioning, and the same pastor will laugh now because Sebastian is asking the questions of me that I was asking of this pastor. It's like, it's so funny. So
it's going to have
to deal with it. But I think that's part of working out a robust faith.
Yeah.
And me getting to the point where I was like, I was quite happy for people to look at me and go, you're mad, Phil, like a bloke doesn't just come back to life.
Yeah.
But then I thought, well, the premise isn't just on me proving that he did. Could you actually show me that he didn't?
Yes, yeah.
And sort of having those sort of conversations that demonstrate that you haven't just left your brain in the glove box of the car on a Sunday morning. You actually are surrounded by very intelligent people who have faith. And
what was it like in the world of work for you, in the sense when friends found out? Were they intrigued, shocked, take you off Facebook? Yeah, we had a few who kind of didn't quite know what to do with it. And then things like, I recall my son being kind of uninvited from a birthday party because it was a sleepover, and one year we'd gone to pick him up to go to church. Like, he was only smaller, and the following year they didn't invite him to the sleepover. Yeah. And I blogged about it, didn't know names, and I blogged about it, and the year after. And again, interesting what you decide to put a line in the sand in your faith over publicly. Yeah. The year after, the same party, but the wording of the message was, we understand that some of you will want to go to church on Sunday mornings, so we have changed. So it kind of went from feeling quite like confronted to over a 3-year, people seeing, I expected it was going to wear off, so I don't blame my friends for thinking that it might. They're just, it's a phase you're going through. Yeah. And but you seem to be pushing that phase out till quite a few years. Eternity. That's interesting. Yeah. So job switch, you're still involved in all that PR stuff, aren't you? What does work look like, and how do you think about it? Sort of years into being a Christian rather than those first few months, because it's a bit like when you were 17 or 18 and you really got intense with Jesus, you threw out all your old records because you thought, no, that's the old world. That doesn't marry with this one. But you obviously, you can't do that with a job. You can't do that with career as much, and you shouldn't. How has that navigated over the years of how you viewed work as you mature as a Christian?
Well, I think part of it is actually getting clear on what a theology of work is. And, you know, it's not like God said to Adam and Eve, no, you don't work the garden, you just loll around drinking margaritas all day. It's like,
that was heaven. No, that's right.
So, you know, there is something of actually understanding that work is good, and yes, okay, it's been broken by the fall and we're always going to have this tension, but, you know, work can be good and you can, you know, find a fulfillment in it. And I think trying to just compartmentalise the two doesn't work, because I always believe you have to turn up to work as yourself.
Yeah.
But I guess in the way I did kind of throw the records out for a while, I was just in a lucky enough space to have a well-functioning agency and team that allowed me to go off and be an ops manager of a mission, try that out because the mission funding for me wasn't sufficient. So the fact that my agency could fund me at the same time was benefit for everyone. So I got a bit of both, and then I was kind of back more in the agency, but then more and more like kind of thinking, well, okay, Lord, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to be, I'd been doing some itinerant preaching, and, you know, my drive to just want to keep growing a business wasn't there anymore.
That's interesting. And
then it was a couple of years ago, and my husband and I were walking on the beach and we were praying, and I kind of said to the Lord, well, what would you like me to do? And very clearly he said, would you sell the agency?
Be cool.
And I was like, sure, but it funds a few things, but okay. And kind of pondered and left it. And then about a week later he said, if I blessed the agency, would you continue doing your ministries? And I was like, well, no brainer, that's what's been going on. And the agency picked up quite significantly, quite quickly, and suddenly I had no room for all the other ministries I was doing. Yeah. And I kind of realised that that's actually not the space I wanted to be in.
Wow.
So that's what set me into, okay, let's sell and let's just see what God wants to do. And within 24, 48 hours of finalising the sale, I got a contact from the person who didn't give me a job because I wasn't a Christian.
Back then?
Saying, there's this role, and we'd stayed in contact because I couldn't help it. I baptised in Warrenora River, and I'm like emailing him going, you might want to know what happened since you didn't employ me.
Oh, sorry, we filled the position.
So we'd kind of always stayed in contact, and it's kind of interesting, and it's sort of been interesting, seeing what has involved at, where I am now at an Anglican school, and you can't meet Jesus the way I did, which was kind of sparked from a Christian school, without thinking that that's a mission field.
Of course,
as well.
And it is, isn't it? That, and I do things with Christian schools where I'm working with helping teachers think about this is frontline mission. For many of these students have no background as well.
So, but I mean, most of it really is purely what I would call normal, everyday PR, marketing and communications. It's quite interesting because I often will pray, okay, Lord, so the whole Bible college and preaching is on hold, or...
Do they dovetail, I suppose?
A little bit. Yeah, we'll see. It's sort of, it's never what you imagine.
And so, question, meeting Jesus and church. Some people think, some people struggle to put those two together. How's church been as you've matured as a Christian? Because I think when you first come to church as a Christian, you're sort of looking around like this, and then you get to see how the machinations are, and you get to see what God's people are like. You get to see long-term progress or long-term failure or all those sorts of things. How would you sum up church for you as someone coming in later?
Well, I think, God was, it demonstrates just how relational God is in terms of, the pastor who picked up the phone when I called the church that day, and just such a lovely group of Christians within the church, the first life group, study groups I was part of, all fed into me getting a really kind of strong scriptural background and kind of framework for it all. But then I think also you kind of have to look at this sort of modern lens that says, well, I'm also, someone who's run her own business, female, and I remember doing a gift survey in this church, and my gifts came back as leadership, teaching, preaching, and one person looked at me and went, well, what are you going to do with these in church?
As if there's a disconnect between,
So that was kind of confronting. So me being me, I just kept freestyling and praying and doing, whatever I felt God was calling me to do, and which resulted in more itinerant preaching. But often that sort of sense of, I did sometimes feel like I was a bit of a square peg in a round hole. But again, doors opened, and you end up in different churches and seasons. And I mean, my big thing is I often think that, particularly certain denominations' approach with women is actually a blocker to the gospel going out. Particularly if you look at a workplace with numerous female leaders who would look at. I've got a friend who's currently working with me and is exploring the Bible. She's not a Christian, but she already is saying things
that's a
like,
defeater belief, perhaps, in that sense.
Yes, she's like, I don't understand how someone who's intelligent, got numerous degrees, and even if you explain it in the context of serving, you think, well, it's interesting because a male in that context can serve far more and serve using all of his gifts.
But how do you say that to someone who's I know it's very hard. So Phil, church leadership, following Jesus, telling people about Jesus in church settings, preaching, all those things. Sometimes when you write down, or when you're viewed as a leader and you're in a church setting and you're in the secular world working, churches don't know what to do with people who come up as a leader, do they? They sort of think that, well, if you're earning enough money, that can fund us. But how do churches use leaders well, and how do they not use them well, from your experience?
I think part of it is looking at how churches and different denominations develop their own leadership, because you don't necessarily get lots of leadership exposure and yet you find yourself leading the church. And then you might get people in your congregants who are phenomenally talented leaders.
Better leaders than the minister.
Yes. And often you don't know what you don't know, and then what happens is you probably then aren't able to actually speak into that leadership gift set of your congregant to get the best out of it. And then it requires a certain type of volunteer who can say, look, these are my skill sets, this is what I'm really, really good at, how can you use me? And often if it's not a strategic approach to leadership, which often I don't believe it
churches struggle with that a little bit.
It ends up being incredibly reactive, and people who are good leaders from the secular world don't think reactively.
No.
They can look at a strategic plan and offer support, and often that means that a lot of their skills and talents, I believe, are just left on the table.
Yes.
I mean, I've had a great example recently where I've offered, and praise God, the leader has gone, this is awesome because I don't need more volunteers, I need more leaders.
Yeah.
And we're at A, I need to get to Z, I don't need to tell you B, C, D, E, F, G, off you go.
Yeah.
And it requires, you need high trust, you need all of those things. And a good leader leads, I think, like anything, you hold it loosely and you lead from behind. But often I think the very nature of managing what can be a volunteer culture means that leaders in churches insert themselves in because they have to, with, let's say, 80% of the volunteers, say, now step 2, step 3, step 4. So this one church leader in particular said to me, please tell me if I get in the way, because I don't mean to do, but I fear I will. And I said, I think you're being tough on yourself, but I think it's a consequence of when you feel, as a church leader, you sometimes have to micromanage your volunteers.
So one of the mantras is you staff to your weaknesses in church staff settings, but you probably need to volunteer leader. You've got to find the right volunteer leaders that fill in the gaps of your own weaknesses as well, and then trust them that they know what they're doing to gather the right volunteers to lead in that sense.
And looking at it operationally, and I think the whole thing is that we talk about Christian humility, so therefore people don't lean into owning their gifts because they're trying to be humble. I mean, I used to laugh because I would sit in like a Bible study group and it would take 10 minutes for someone to make the coffee because everyone would go, no, if you want to, you do it. No, I'll do it. No, and it's this whole, someone just make the coffee.
Yeah.
We're not treading, it's the whole fear of treading over someone's kind of getting in the way.
Yeah.
While I think, my approach has always been, I can do A, B, C, D, and E, what do you want? And I think often even that can be overwhelming.
That's true. And now, final question. You became a Christian later in life. What would you say to someone who was maybe not getting a sailboat with Mr. Christian written on it, but thinking, God might be speaking to me? What would be your advice to them?
Do some reading. Read one of the Gospels. Read something like Tim Keller's Reason for God in Their Skepticism. What else did I read? The Prodigal God as well. That's a nice thin read. Go and find some Christians and hang out with them. And I think a lot of people, and a lot of surveys will show that people don't, aren't kind of get freaked out by church and institutions, but actually when they meet Christians go, oh, they're actually kind of cool people.
So capital C church is a baddie, but small C church, the average Christians, but they're good. So there's good things to them.
And I remember when I got baptised, like, public event, Warren River with the youth church, like I was probably one of the old boilers, and there were a couple of hundred people down on the riverbank. Watching.
Yeah.
And friends I'd invited, a couple of quite rabid atheists, were sort of like looking around in shock, going, I can't believe there are all these people here. This is bigger than I assumed, sort of thing. So I think, just ask questions of people. Go and, find someone that you trust who you think might have faith. Or get online and just make a short course.
As someone said, it's mixing their metaphors. It's not rocket surgery.
No, and God will hunt you down. I mean, this is it. I called that pastor back after he said to me, I know how this will end. And I went, okay, this was so many months on. How did you know? Thinking he was going to say there was this amazing prophetic thing that I had on the phone. And he went, in all my years of ministry, he said, one, no one has ever picked up, I've never picked up the phone and heard someone say, look, just tell me more about Jesus. It was like, okay. He said, then he told me what had happened. He said, then he told me the name of your daughter. And he just thought, I reckon God's hunting this one down and he doesn't lose a chase.
That's a great way to end it, Philippa. Thank you so much for sharing your life story with us from that bit of it. And just, giving us so many good ideas about who God is, what Jesus is doing, and the work world. It's been very, very informative. So thank you so much.
Pleasure.